Australians will go to the polls. And with over 3 million pre-polling votes already cast, we need to ask, have Australians already made up their minds? But is it still a sign of Australia telling the Morrison government it has had enough and it's time to go and they need to go quickly? Well, Saturday night's going to be a fascinating night if you're a political junkie. And if that's the case, all eyes will be glued to the election coverage. Now, there's only three ways the election can go. It will either be a coalition victory, a Labor victory, or a hung parliament, which could well be unworkable if preference deals can't be done. And that would send Australians back to the polls within 4 to 6 weeks. Joining the Informer once again is Steve Carey, Newsflash Media Managing Director and former 7 News boss. Well, Steve, there's 2 days to go. What's changed?
It's been a big week, hasn't it? It's been a very big week. I mean, it's been a bit of a circus, I reckon. We've had the Prime Minister crash tackling a kid in Tasmania yesterday. We've had him calling the opposition leader Forrest Gump after the Mr Albanese allegedly ran away from the press in WA. We've had pressure from politicians from all sides of the party calling each other everything under the sun. So this is what happens when you get within 48 hours of the big day. So there's been a lot happening. Is it any clearer? Well, no. We're still really anticipating and waiting for the opposition to table, if you want, all of their policy about costing. So that's the big story now over the next 24, 48 hours, certainly the next 24 hours. What's that costing look like? Can the opposition stand up to and weather the storm that's going to come from the coalition, which will be looking through line by line and absolutely trying to tear that policy to bits?
You know, has both camps played into the narrative of the other ones? We had Scott Morrison distancing himself from Scott Morrison, which was exactly what the Labor's talking points were about. And we've also had Albanese and Labor refusing to release their budgets, which plays into the Morrison camp of you don't know what you're getting.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one, isn't it? To be honest, I think what we're seeing is a little bit of, you know, I dare say politicking. It is politicking, but we're seeing a little bit of both parties doing what they've done, which is they see something they like of the other side, which is hitting and resonating with the electorate. For example, Mr Albanese is not your firebrand, you know, rah, rah, rah speaker, and that seems to have resonated a little bit. The Prime Minister then comes out and says, you know, he's no longer the bulldozer, and then 24 hours later, you know, knocks over a kid. I mean, unintentionally, of course, but the look is there. I mean, it's all there, isn't it? So what we're seeing is both sides are looking at what the other's doing, I think, and they are playing it a little bit to what they think the electorate wants to see and hear. So in Mr Albanese's case, he could not be more middle of the road, could he? I mean, you look at the way he's been crafted. We don't want to talk too much about dramatic weight loss, but he's certainly lost weight. He looks pretty good. You know, the suits are really power suits. The tailoring is spot on. Does he look like the old style Bob Hawke kind of PM? I don't think so. And he wouldn't be setting out to do that. He's appealing to the middle ground. And so Mr Morrison, the Prime Minister, in my view, has then gone, oh, wow, this seems to be having a bit of bite. I have been pretty hard over the last, certainly, couple of years. Maybe it's time for me to soften a bit. So he's changed his narrative a little bit. Will the electorate believe it? We'll know on Saturday, you know, that's the thing. And is it too little too late? I mean, it's very hard. What's that saying? You know, a leopard can't change its spots, and to change spots a couple of days or a week out from an election, it's a big ask.
Yeah. Now, we've seen the polling tighten right up. Just to add a little bit more drama to it, we've seen the bookies tighten right up. So both indicators are tightening up. We've seen Christine Keneally went from pretty safe-leaning Labor, 14%, dropped right back into a neck-and-neck race with the ex-deputy mayor, I think, Daly. Yeah. That's a huge mistake, parachuting someone from the Northern Beaches into a Western Sydney seat, isn't it?
Well, that remains to be seen. I mean, the indicators are, you're right, but let's see what happens on election day. I mean, you only remember the winners, don't you? If they win the seat by a fraction of a percent, they've still won, and everybody will say that was brilliant campaigning. You know, parachuting somebody in, as you say, it's an old tactic. It's been around for a long, long time. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. it would work in Miss Keneally's case if the person she's up against wasn't pretty popular, like very, very popular. So, and we're seeing that it's not just in that seat, we're seeing that with the so-called teal independents, most of whom are women, by the way, and they're all really good performers. I mean, they may be single platform, and we've talked about that. That's the weakness of their side, but the strength is they're really good performers, and they are giving the incumbents in all those areas an absolute run for their money. I mean, look at Josh Frydenberg. I mean, that would have been unthinkable an election ago. Now it's like he's out there campaigning as if his life depends on it, and his political life may well depend on it. I mean, so that's going to be very, very interesting, I think, on Saturday. How well are those independents and some of those minor parties going to go? And if it does come down to the wire, then they do hold the balance of power. And do we end up with a situation where we're horse trading on everything from climate to security to economy? Does it become unworkable? You know, that's the big question for me is, are we going, what kind of parliament, what kind of leadership are we going to end up with after 2 years of really tough times through a pandemic, bushfires and everything else, and floods? So it's a big one for me.
Yeah, well, we've seen both sides fairly staunch and fairly adamant that they will not do a deal with the independents, but I think we can see that.
We've talked about this, and as I said a couple of interviews ago, everybody says they're not going to do a deal. Everybody says they're not going to work with, you know, the independents, because you have to show belief in yourself and leadership. But the truth is, you know, the devil's always in the details. So if that becomes a reality, if one of the other parties has to do a deal with some independents to actually form government, does anybody for 1 second honestly believe that Labor or Liberal coalition would not do a deal to get themselves back into power? Of course, but you can't say that at this stage, because you have to be saying we're showing strength. We have the resolve to see it through at this stage. I mean, it's all about what you say, your body language, how you say it, and what that public perception is. Are you a strong person who believes in what you're doing, or are you somebody that's already thinking, oh, well, I can't win, so I'll be ready to do a deal? Nobody's going to take that path at this stage, even coming into the final stages of the election.
Well, with the polls tightening up, Steve, is there anything you can put your finger on that may have caused it? Because I would have thought Morrison's admission that Morrison is a bit of a, a liability would have drawn the polls out further.
It's an interesting one, and to be honest, we'll see. I mean, I've often said you can't be all things to all people. You have to steer the course of what you believe is right. So, and right may not resonate with some people. That's fine. I honestly think where you come unstuck is when you try to be everything to everybody, because nobody can be that. You can have good intention and you can say that you're going to set the course to do certain things that will benefit most people. But what and how has it tightened up? I just think that that's the nature of politics. And we talked, or in your intro, you talked about the enormous amount of people that have already voted. Well, my gut feeling tells me that most of those votes, I would think people clearly have made up their mind. They don't care about what Labor's going to do with their policy. They don't care about what Mr. Morrison's going to say. They're either rusted on Labor or rusted on Liberal. Is it a big vote against the government? I can't wait to get them out, so we're going to vote. Who knows? I mean, in the past, it would seem to be that way, that people have had enough, they want to get it done. Is there also a bit of a, this has been a campaign, I'm just sick of it, I don't care either party, I just want to get it done? We'll know fairly quickly. And that's why I think this election, I think people would find it very interesting to watch the coverage wherever it starts, on whatever channel, whatever network, because we should get some really early interesting trends. If it's a landslide, we'll know. If it's very, very, very close, then we'll be looking at those seats in Queensland, and we'll also be looking at those seats, particularly in WA. There are 2 or 3 that are really crucial to the coalition retaining. If they lose them, then that'll tell us what we need to know. So it'll be fascinating.
Yeah, one of the things I'm finding this election more so than any other, and with the new journalism journey I'm on, I've paid more attention. A lot of the independent votes basically a protest vote. And it's going to be interesting to see with their preferences, have they gone down the line and put the majors at the end? So, you know, well, it's not just a matter of, I'm going Clive Palmer first, Liberal second. Is it, I've gone Clive Palmer, UAP, Justice Party, every Liberal Democrat, everyone except for the majors down last, and whether that's going to play a part.
Well, I mean, preferencing is always problematic for the government. So, you know, anybody that wants to have a protest can go tick, tick, tick. Or do they follow the pro forma? I mean, again, it's an interesting, you know, question in terms of how will it play out. To me, that's more the minutiae of, you know, the wash up of what happens after the day. I'm really interested. What is the swing early on? So we should know pretty early on. If there's a massive, we'll know. And then it becomes, to me, the secondary part is, how are those independents going? You know, how many of them are going to get in? What are the shocks? You know, there's always a shock. Something's going to happen in any election night coverage, because you see swings either way. And sometimes it can be micro. It can be stuff that has got nothing to do with the wider population. It can be intrinsic just to that localised little part of the country. So you see a swing which sometimes isn't borne out. But to me, you know, the amount of money, you talked about Clive Palmer, the amount of money that they are spending. If you look here at the major dailies, like the Herald Sun, for example, it's 2-page spreads, page 2 and 3. I mean, that costs a huge amount of money. Will it have any impact? Will people be swayed? Are we going to go a little bit, you know, the ultra-right American kind of style of politics, where we've got these rabid, you know, rusted on, very engaged voters who are wildly supportive of their particular party and what it stands for? And if they do get into power, how, you know, and hold some of that balance of power, how does that play out? You know, there are a lot more questions, you know, to be answered, and the election day is only going to answer one of them, which is who's going to be in power.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see. I think the reporting is Palmer's spending around $3 million a day in.
It's phenomenal. I mean, it's mind blowing how much he is spending. And I always have a wry smile when I see the poster or the print saying, you know, Craig Kelly, our next Prime Minister. And I think, fake news.
Yeah. That's one of the other things, I think, Steve, that's been really interesting in this campaign, is the fact that not only have we lost confidence in our leaders and their major parties, the constant undermining and messaging about the mainstream media being biased, that's also caused a lot of it, because people, it's very easy to attack the messenger rather than the message. And you can't believe that because it's in this masthead, and you can't believe this because it's on that network. And I think that has actually worsened the level of trust we have in our leaders.
Yeah, of course. And we've talked about that previously, but all I would say to that is, we're actually lucky to have the quality and calibre of the reporters that we have in mainstream. You'd expect me to say that as a former director of news at Seven and a long-time reporter myself in another life. So, but we, you know, they do a very good job. Of course, some bias creeps in. It can't, you know, people are people. That's why we have people doing reporting, not robots. And not everybody will be happy with one way of seeing it or another. But you'll notice with me, I've always called it Mr. Morrison or Mr. Albanese. I do not like, you know, using the slang of ScoMo and Albo and all that sort of stuff. I think incumbent in political life, we should have some respect, because if we can't respect even our leaders, then how do we respect the process? So to me, I think you've always got to have a bit of a grain of salt and go, I may not agree with that, but I challenge people always then to read the flip side. Read something that you don't align yourself with, so that it pressure tests what you're thinking and it makes you think about other things. I mean, that's a conversation probably for another day, but I'd urge people to, you know, watch, understand. If they don't like it, go to other sources and fact check it themselves. That's the best advice I could give.
Yeah, I think one of the things that people are missing, if you're barracking against either side, you're basically barracking against Australia. Whoever gets in, we need them to succeed and we need them to do well.
Yeah, and I guess from my point of view, laying my cards on the table, I would rather see a strong Labor or Liberal coalition rather than a hung parliament. To me, the worst possible outcome would be a hung parliament. And yet I hear, because I've also read, I hear other people saying a hung parliament, it's what we need to reinvigorate and you know, bring fierce debate back into parliament so that every idea has to be prosecuted. But sometimes you need to act quickly. And I think some of the issues that are intrinsic in our way of life, for example, economy, security, those kind of things, foreign investment, they need a quicker, deft hand. They don't need, you know, 6, 7, 8, 10 months of debate before we get some tiny little deal. And that's what worries me. So I'm hoping on Saturday that there's a clear message to either party, whichever way it goes, but whichever party gets in has the ability to actually lead and govern, because that, to me, would be in our best interest.
Yep. Well, win, lose or draw, whatever the outcome, Steve, we've both got to go to work on Monday morning, and life goes on. And as you mentioned, Saturday night, I'm ready with my fondue for the Don's party. Before.
Good.
So,
Good job.
Steve, Kerry, thanks so much for your time, and I'll see you on the other side for a wrap up, hopefully.
Good on you. Take care.
Thanks, Steve.